Okay, welcome back everyone who's joining us in the live Zoom room, and welcome to those who are following us on YouTube, either this evening or asynchronously down the road. This is session 5 of the 4th semester of Core Enaction at Mind and Life Europe, where each week we're taking up a domain of practice, as many of you know, via a particular verb through the lens of participatory sense making. And in true enactive style, we're looking at the circulatory process of how these practices, how these verbs shape our understanding of participatory sense-making, and also how participatory sense-making informs these different intersubjective practices. So tonight's verb is curating, and I'm especially excited, I think, along with everyone else here, about the presentation, the conversation tonight. Because I suspect it'll enlarge and enrich and deepen and perhaps even disrupt our common understanding of the verb curating, which will be taking up really in the largest possible sense. So both in a professional sense, curating in the artistic domain, but also in the sort of meta-professional sense of how do we curate meaning together? How do we make sense together in various contexts? So before I turn it over to our lead host this evening, Laetitia Renaud, as is custom, Hannah Dieger is not with us this session, but we hope she'll be back for the end of the semester. And so as is custom, Hannah would usually guide us through a brief embodied practice just to ground us all, and linking that maybe with tonight's theme, curating. And I'd just like to borrow a note from the work of Shay Welch, actually one of our speakers. And she talks about mining the body for questions. So I just would like to maybe invite us all just to take about 30, 40 seconds together. And if you'd like, you can close your eyes, make sure you're comfortable in your seat, and just maybe let that question drop into your awareness. What would it mean to mine the body for questions as a mode of curating meaning, of making meaning? And as we like to talk about a lot at Mind and Life Europe, what would a listening epistemology bring forward at this moment? What would the listening body bring forward in response to that question? Okay, and if you're ready or when you're ready, there's no rush, but you can open your eyes again or shift your seat. And now I think we can launch into the more dialogical part of the evening. And I'm happy to pass the baton to you, Letitia, to introduce our main speaker this evening.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome. Thanks, Johanna, for this very precious practice that is already our way habit to start our sessions in that manner. So I would like to say welcome to Shay Welsh and Karen. Are you there? Yeah. So I will introduce our speakers first. So Shay Welsh is an associate professor of philosophy at Spelman College in Atlanta, United States, and she's currently the scholar in residence for the City of Atlanta's Public Art Project. The project is titled The Public Performance Art as Resistance to Epistemic Injustice. Recently, she was the 2020-2021 Carnegie Corporation and Rockefeller Foundation Distinguished Research Creative Scholar, and she is also a board committee member for Emotions Matter, a national nonprofit organization, and she teaches courses on freedom, embodied knowledge, embodied cognition, dance, systemic oppression, ethics, sex, feminism, and Native American philosophy. In her free time, Shay performs circus arts and races motorcycles. So Shay, thanks very much for being with us tonight or today there in Atlanta. And yeah, welcome. So I will now introduce Karen. Karen Holdaway Grom, our other invited speaker. Hi, Karen. Nice to meet you. So Karen is museum director and curator of collaborative art projects at Trapholt Museum of Modern Art, Craft and Design in Coding, Denmark. She explores and researches how to make the arts accessible and relevant to multiple citizens through engagement and exchange. So Karen, thanks very much for accepting our invitation, for being with us. And I would like to start this conversation also in the way that we started the other sessions. So bringing the two main guiding questions that are our guiding questions for the whole semester, and to frame them through these lenses of curation and curating. Both of your work are very, very rich, and they could be framed through the other verbs of the semester too. So improvising or learning and teaching. But yeah, for this session, we decided to approach both of your works, very rich works, through these lenses of the curation. And the main guiding questions that will start our conversation are the ones related to the intersubjective expertise. So the first one is just an invitation for you both to tell us something about the intersubjective expertise in your practice, in your concrete practice. So as maybe you have seen in the other sessions, in the previous sessions, the starting point of the participatory sense-making theory that are guiding us through this semester is that idea that everyone has an intersubjective expertise. We are all experts by virtue of being human, and or maybe for being in this world, not only being human, but being a live being. And each of you, on top of that, have a particular intersubjective expertise in your work. So as a curator or choreographer, researcher, artist, professor, and so on. So we would like to invite you to speak about these practices. So talk to us a bit about your work, introduce a bit, and to present what do you do in your practices, and to talk about them in terms of intersubjective expertise that you already seen in it, or you know to be there in it. And also possible questions that you can also talk about is still opening to improve. Are there areas of friction, of tension, of quest in your work? And so this is the first big question. And the other one that I would like to invite you to start the conversation as to to talk about what is at stake for you as practitioners. So this can be on a meta level, like talking about the methodological questions related to your work, how to do, for example, participatory research or collaborations in various levels, or in a very concrete manner in your practice. So what matters to you? What is at stake for you? When you collaborate, when you engage and interact with students, colleagues, institutions, collaborators. So this is, I know this is a lot, but I would like to invite you to speak about your work with these questions in mind. So I will pass the baton to Shay first. So thanks very much.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a whole lot.
I know,
So
Shay.
I'm trying to think of a way to address all of them. I think that generally speaking, my experience of intersubjectivity is just pretty much everybody's experience of subjectivity in terms of lived experience. And the fact that nothing that we do has meaning outside of our relationship to others. And I have always regarded meaning making as embodied, specifically because of my lived experience historically with, I mean, starting from a kid, expanding to my family, issues of domestic violence, addiction, sex work, all of those kinds of things set me up very early to always center the body as the source of knowing, and that all of the meaning making I saw going on and that I started to understand very early was the meaning making between bodies, and how bodies interact with each other under, domination relationships, how bodies are treated in terms of the medical field with respect to mental illness and madness, especially as it comes from trauma. So me moving through the world as a body, always aware of other bodies and how bodies are given uptake by other bodies, has always been how I lived and how I understood sense making as a being in relation. And so I when I was reading in graduate school and just historically, and I saw all of these accounts of sense making as sort of like from the individualist perspective and the atomistic perspective, and even like the existentialist perspective where it's like you make your own meaning, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this makes no sense. You can't possibly make sense on your own, external to others or like in contrast to others. Like, that's just not possible. And so all of my work, starting from my very first research, because my research has expanded I have so many different subdisciplines that I work in. And, I'm interdisciplinary and I work across everything from philosophy of mind to indigenous body knowledges to, feminist epistemology. And all of my work across all of the books has always centered the body. And so when I got to the work on, and I was doing body knowledge, like explicit body knowledge all the way through my work. And so when I got to the embodied cognition stuff, which happened to pop up, a little bit of Mark Johnson popped up in some of the Native American philosophy that I was reading for my book, I was like, boom, I need it. And then I went in and I was like, this is the ticket. This is everything. And then I just read everything I could get my hands on. And that's how I started working in that area explicitly. And I was using my understanding of choreographing to make sense of embodied knowledge and embodied meaning making. And it was probably probably when I got my hands on participatory sense making that I was able to lock everything in place. But the mining the body for questions is an individual practice that can be partner practice. It can be, in my book, my last book, I talk about partner practice as well. That's very participatory sense making. But using somatic improvisational dance as a way of internalizing to the body and finding the questions that the body is interested in knowing, because the body wants to know things that maybe explicit belief is trying to suppress. And there's so much literature on how dance and embodied cognition can be used to craft narratives. But I knew that even more importantly, it could be used to find the critical questions that we have in the body, and that the body already has the questions to which the narrative can respond. And so I created a movement method to substantiate this idea. And so I wrote the book all on, improvisational somatic work and sense making from an embodied cognition standpoint. And then I got some performers, professional dancers, professional circus artists, and we spent a very long time doing movement experiments. And I was able to craft an entire movement method that can bring one to actually go through this process successfully. And it was funny because they were my friends, obviously. I knew who they were. They gave me a discount on the price. They were all on board about the narrative stuff, but they were all skeptical about the internalized approach to be able to access knowledge in the body. And by the time we were done, they were just like, their whole minds and approach to using the body for movement just completely changed. And they were like, this is amazing. And I was like, oh, thank God I wasn't wrong. So that was where I started. And, drawing from my own experience as an intersubjective performer to literally substantiate how embodied cognition and works, and how participatory sense making can work in partner embodied dialogue, right? Strictly through movement. And so that was really fun. And then I realized that there was just more to think about in terms of participatory sense making with partners that expanded beyond intentional dyad relationships, right? And that's how I started getting into my new project. And my new project, so all of the work that I do uses some kind of context to develop the accounts of embodied cognition that I'm trying to set out. And what I'm talking about is how public art can be used as an explicit democratic communication tool with others in public spaces, understood in a participatory sense-making framework, but that extends across time and extends across expanses of space between people who are not explicitly intentionally interacting, and how the body, in the creatively moving body, is able to connect with another over there, and that their body can take up the communicative power of the performing artist, and that that will resonate with them enter the body, and that person can carry that knowledge with them in their body that will have effects on their own embodied knowledges, right? So I'm taking participatory sense making and I'm like really expanding it, and I'm taking it to a place that people would be very critical of. Like, how could you have joint sense making activities between two people who are not intentionally acting with each other? And how can it happen so far away from each other? And so I've developed a couple of experiments thanks to Tony Camaro and his Strange Tools Lab, and also Beck Todd in the Brain Center at British Columbia. And I was awarded or named the Scholar in Residence for Atlanta's Public Art Project. And so I have hired some dancers. Actually, I have a lot of creative movers. I have a break dancer, I have a mime, I have an experimental theater person, I have an aerialist, I have a 90-year-old hand balancer, and they're all instructed to create movement pieces using one of my methods for creating narrative with movement. And we'll go perform it out in the public parks for which I'm the resident over. And we're going to conduct all of these experiments to measure perceptual uptake by the passersby, and to check there's some software that can check arousal in people just from video. So the video can actually direct its, like, it can identify a person and run some kind of, it's not recognition software, but it's some kind of recognition to measure arousal by looking at blood flow that can be seen through the skin. So I'll be able to tell what the explicit perceptual attention span looks like. Then we'll have research that can look to see what arousal looks like in terms of heart rate and other kinds of things. And then I'll be able to just do a really superficial, like, I'll be able to look at their facial expressions and see if it's one of annoyance or joy or pleasure, or, you know what I mean? And see how people are reacting, because the performances are not going to be announced. They're not going to be performances, and there's not going to be an audience. We're just going, it's kind of like a pop-up art sort of thing. So we're going to go out into a space, they're going to perform. They may or may not have costumes. I just left that up to them. And then we're going to see what people who aren't expecting an artist, how they respond to an artist, and see if that intentional communicative movement is given uptake by people by measuring all of these other aspects. And so that's what I'm going to use to develop this account of participatory sense making across time and space. One hopes that it works. So I've done a lot of the writing, but I put it on hold, and now I've got a year to do these experiments, and then we'll go back to the books. So that's that. And in terms of looking at the questions for today, I'm hoping, am I going on too long? Should I like skip the questions for today until later? What do we think?
The questions about curation specifically?
Yeah.
So maybe we can listen a little bit, Karen, because you already
Yes.
mentioned so many things. I have so many questions already. So maybe you can talk about the curation a little bit later. And so I would like to invite Karen also to join in and to talk about her work as museum director and curator of collaborative art, because I think it resonates with a lot of things that you already mentioned, Che. So this participatory sense making across time and space. So the museum is a very good place to ask these questions. So Karen, please welcome. And I would like to invite you also to bring your experience to think about these questions that Shay mentioned.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you for the
perfectly.
invitation, which has caused a lot of thoughts in my head about the work I do, because your questions are different to the way I usually approach the work at Trapholt. And thank you, Shay, for that very exciting introduction to your work. I think maybe it will be a good idea just to tell where I come from and what work we are talking about. So I work at the Trapholt Museum of Modern Art, Applied Art and Design in Denmark. It is about 2 hours drive from Copenhagen, and the space we're working in resembles the Museum Louisiana, which many of you might know in Copenhagen if you've been there, which is like a very nice, relaxed, beautiful building where people come for the day and spend 2 to 3, 4 hours experiencing different exhibitions. At the museum, we work with different things, and to be honest, I wasn't sure which project you were particularly interested in, but I'll just line up how a few of the overall ways we work. So we are an attraction, so we make big and beautiful scientifically researched projects about design, about contemporary problems in the world discussed through the arts. We do art exhibitions with a special focus on the affective and how we sense art. And then we do collaborative art pieces with up to 1,000 participants. And I think that is maybe where we will go with this conversation. Whereas the other things are not traditional, but are known forms, then the collaborative art pieces are very different to what other museums do. So I was allowed to show one slide. So can I show that now?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
please.
So I'll just share host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think you have to
We will
allow me.
solve that.
Is that possible?
Yes.
I will also.
Yeah. Probably it's working now.
It works now. All right. I'll try. My screen is not quite right. This is just to give you an impression of what we do in the museum when we do collaborative art pieces, and I just wanted to make that. There we go. At the museum, since 2014, we have done large-scale collaborative art pieces, and you see a few of them here. People have been knitting, different constructions. We have worked with wood turning. 320 wood turners have participated in making this construction. More than 600 people participated in embroidering an art piece about borders. And during COVID, people from all over the country sent in crocheted light bulbs for the museum. So this is just to give an impression of the scale of the projects that we make at the museum. We can just leave it again. Well, how do we do that? Stop share. This was just to give you an impression of both the space and also the scale of the projects, and also the different crafts that we use. The idea when we do collaborative art pieces is that we thoroughly believe in that people have competences and personal competences that can be that are their personal, but if they put into a framework created by the museum together with an artist, then what people are really good at can become something amazing together with others. So we collaborate with artists with whom we set up a few rules, and then we ask people to contribute with something they're good at, wood turning, for example, and or crocheting, or knitting, or embroidering. And the reason we do it is because if we frame people's uh, uh, competences in new ways. Maybe they are good at doing embroidery, but maybe the form is not so interesting. But when it's put together with an artist's vision, then we stretch the creativity of the person who does the embroidery. We also create a community where people participate on something which is bigger than themselves. And we also make them reflect and participate and engage with some subjects that they maybe did not have ideas about before. So this is the idea behind what we work with. So a thorough belief in that if we bring in believe in the competences, then we can create something bigger than what the artist could have done herself or himself. They could not have created such variety and so many different thoughts. Such plurality could the artist never have created herself. Why are we doing this at the museum? Well, I always usually introduce the art museum and say that the arts are singular and voiced by one person who shares personal experiences with others. The art institution is for the society. It is a plural space for many voices, and it is meant to create a better society. And I always say that the arts must be their own, and we can look at it in art historical ways. But actually, when we stretch, we can do many other things with the arts than only looking at it art historically. Can be a part of creating a better society. And we see the art museum as an arena for being and becoming, and where we can have friction and different ideas. So what we cannot make people be different, but we can create an arena where their personal experiences can come into a process of becoming. Some of the challenges doing that in an art museum, which is a very, very stiff institution. People have a very firm idea about what an art museum is. An art museum is a place where we go and we are silent and we are going to understand something. So you could say we have challenges in people being over-determined. They think it is in a specific way. So we have to take that determination away for some people, and others are under-determined. They don't really know what to do, and they don't really care. Where's the toilet and where's the cafe, or why am I here? Who brought me here? So under-engaged. So we have to find a new way of creating a space where the arts can become relevant for the person, and that is through the participating and sense making through their own abilities being put into a new frame. Yeah, it's a long story. Usually I have a long slideshow. It was very challenging having to explain it without
Yeah,
pictures.
it's a bit.
These are some of the ideas. that we work with, and the results, the aim for us is always to create real art pieces. Some of these art pieces I showed you before have been prize-winning art pieces, actually, the art piece of the year. So one of the questions is it interesting for others to look at? And here is I'm very inspired by what you said, Shay, because we were, of course, we know that the art pieces are beautiful, but how would our audiences respond to it? And we have very surprisingly, we did a big evaluation on it last summer, where we found that only 10% of our audiences thought that this was not a right thing to have in the museum. When we exhibit these art pieces, we also show the process. And we found that, and we share how the art pieces have been made. And we found in this evaluation that 90% of the audiences were inspired and wanted to go and do the same or have the same thoughts. So they were kind of very much inspired by these art pieces. I would have thought, I could not imagine that 90% of them liked it, actually, because this is such a stiff and firm institution where people have such big ideas about things should be. Yeah. I don't know whether you understand.
No, it's yeah. No.
But this is
It's a fantastic work, Karen. Thanks very much for sharing it. And I think there are so many bridges to the things that Shay mentioned before. So this idea of the possibility of creating a shared meaning. First recognition that the things are meaningful to each other. They are not meaningful for an individual creating all by himself or herself the meaning. So there is a collaborative work in creating meaning. And so the idea of creating collaborative pieces of work, pieces of art, it is very close to the idea of participatory sense making, this body, this knowledge in the body that Shay mentioned.
But also you have people are making sense through the material they work with.
Yeah.
So we also looked into what is the impact of the materiality. So I'm very inspired by 4E cognition. So thinking of that, how do we stage the space and the practices and the structures and the embodiment, and also the affect theory about how, well, materiality, how they actually create their contribution through the interaction with the materials.
Yeah, and I think this brings back the question that Shay would talk about what it means to curate. So now that we are talking about the creation of meaning, and someone here in the chat also mentioned that. So this idea of curation, or this expanded, stretched idea of curation, in considering these things that you both talked about. So Shay, before Karen, you would say something about that, about the questions for today. So the questions related to the verb.
Okay. So interestingly enough, the role of art is secondary to the way I think about participatory sense making, and it's the art that I'm using again as the context to talk about my interest in participatory sense making. So I guess I'll kind of, would you like me to talk about art and curation, or would you like me to talk about this broader notion of curation? You want
both, but I think we can talk about this broader notion of curation, because I have the impression that you both, in different ways, are talking about a broader sense of curation.
Okay. So obviously participatory sense making is, because it's voluntary, even if it's not explicitly voluntary, even if it's accidental, is a necessarily curative process between, linguistic bodies. And when we think about an authentic mode of participatory sense-making in its curative component, we realize that, or we can realize in real life that that is not the way that most meaning is made between linguistic bodies. So looking at the work on participatory sense-making, when we look at lived experience as it is, we can realize that participatory sense-making is an idealist model. It's a way of, it is normative, and they talk about it being normative, but it's also normative in the respect that it's kind of saying how meaning making ought to be when we understand engaging bodies as linguistic bodies. But participatory sense-making in this respect requires an absence of relations of domination. And when we think about the dominant conceptions of meaning making within the Western framework, we are taught to interact with others in accord with domination relations, right? So we can look at indigenous frameworks and we can see that it's a part of the philosophy of mind or, epistemologies, that interactions are these sort of idealistic participatory sense-making modes. But in the Western framework, we are taught to interact according to domination relationships. And so when linguistic bodies interact with each other, there's already an expectation from one body that the other body will be performing in its subordinate mode. And I think of the biggest concern for epistemic injustice and material injustice as being related to this body-body bias in interactions, right? So I think about the bias that creates oppression as being between bodies and not being between explicit beliefs. So we can think about, for instance, when women interact with men, it is an expectation by both of them that the men will be taking up more space and that they will be more authoritative in their presentation mode, and that women will shrink themselves, and that they will unintentionally allow this unjustifiable authority position of this man's body. So that is sort of a necessary condition of patriarchy in the Western framework. That's just how men's bodies relate to women's bodies. They dominate women's bodies. But also in a racist society, we can see this by looking at how white women shrink their bodies in a different kind of way. So white women will shrink their bodies when they're alone with Black men because of the ingrained embodied fear that stems from the embodied epistemology of white supremacy. So there is just almost no accidental and even voluntary, for the most part, interactions between members of dominant and subordinate groups that can meet the condition of non-domination required by participatory sense-making, because participatory sense-making requires equality and equal autonomy in the sense-making relationship. And the only way that that's not going to happen is if you have two people of exactly the same intersectional identities, right? So like even a white man with a white man, if one of them is from a working class and one of them is from a professional class, you're going to see the domination of the professional man being exerted onto the working class man, right? So this is easy to see when you look at like a software engineer interacting with the janitor who is supposed to be cleaning their space. And then when we look at something that we expect to be a really voluntary relationship, like flirting, right? So flirting is very explicitly voluntary. It's very explicitly a relationship to curate meaning of attraction and interest and engagement. And it seems to satisfy all of the conditions of participatory sense-making that evades domination relationships, but it doesn't. Because of this way that women and men interact with each other as linguistic bodies. So even in a desirable interaction, participatory sense-making as a mutual participatory process becomes undone, right? And I'm just going to, let me see. I'm trying to get us back. Should I give it a break there?
Yes, I just would like to make a bridge to what Karen mentioned about one of the aims of this work with the collaborative pieces of art as a way to build a better society. I was wondering if this better society is related to this fighting this epistemic injustice and this, even if we cannot totally balance these asymmetries. Maybe something like collaborative. I don't know, Karen, if this is the idea behind this better society, but maybe it is there. I don't know. Do you see some relations to these challenges that Shay is mentioning about this participatory sense making as being an idealistic model somehow?
Maybe when I talk about that we as a cultural institution have the aim to create a better society, it is about a more, for me, engaged society with what call it internal motivation to be and share in the society. The people who participate in our projects are very often many women 50 plus, and talking about hierarchies. So this is a very low in the hierarchy. At least I don't think it might not be in other countries the same way, but in Denmark it is really bad to be a woman 50 plus. It's like, no, it's like waste. Cannot use it for anymore. And when the discourse is about who goes to museums, people say, oh, it's women 50 plus. They don't say it's bad because everybody knows it. And one of the aims with these projects, and also what we see, is that these people are extremely empowered. They because what was before considered ridiculous, the little handicraft, all of a sudden becomes talk of the town. And the subjects they are working with all of a sudden become something they can contribute and participate in society with. For example, a project we did in 2022 was called Data Mirror, and we asked people to download their personal Facebook and Google data, and we made an algorithm so we could make a topic model, and through this we could filter their personal data and create a circle pattern with the main topics in their data. So this was all about data and this idea that data is in the cloud, something we don't really know, making it very material and making them reflect on how they represented themselves in this virtual landscape. So we had 630 people participating in this project. And they did find it quite difficult to learn these things, but they learned it, and they did it together with others. They did it with their surroundings. Maybe they could it themselves, or they learned it from us, and they learned it from people they asked. So it became an open system of relations, of learning and participating. And we made an absolutely astonishing art piece, which was, I don't know where I have a picture of it. It was really, really an amazing art piece, huge art piece with these 630 contributions. And the same year, all of a sudden, AI came into our lives. And these people, some of them were participating in workshops developing the next project for us. And they all of a sudden, they became ninjas in their surroundings, because they were the ones who had already been working with data and had filtered the data, of course, in the small scale, but understood the ideas about how language models, and they became people with all of a sudden, through our project, they had embodied experiences of for themselves through our project to participate in these conversations, and they became the centerpiece of conversations in their surround among other people, whereas they beforehand were considered like ridiculous craft stuff, so this was really interesting. We didn't know that we would enter in such a hot topic with our project. I wish I could say it was on purpose, but intuitively we had known that we wanted to work with this, and also the Loom is like data, and yeah, there were many reasons. It's a big project. So this is how, and for us this was quite an amazing experience, because this is what we believe in, and that we can be a part of making more people engage in the world, using their own knowledge, and but also be transformed and become transformed. So both be and become by being in the museum. So this is, and now we're talking specifically on our collaborative art pieces. This is also something we work with in our normal exhibitions. But it's, yeah.
Thanks, Karen. I think it's a good example, both of the problems that Shay was addressing, so all these epistemic injustices, and also a very good example on how curating can disrupt, at least in the moment, some of these asymmetries. Maybe this idea of seeing the impact or the transformations across space and time can also access how deep are these transformations, how they can transform and curate the meanings in other spaces, not only at the museum, but maybe as in the work that Shay was mentioning, in public spaces too. So not only in the domain of art, but in other types of interactions.
Maybe if you allow me, I can just show a little picture of it, if that's, because it's kind of a bit abstract when I tell about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you just, I can just to give you a little brief idea. Can you see the picture now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, so this is the space. It's a huge space, and they had all embroidered these pieces in the colors of these four different. Yeah, there were kind of four all the world's colors woven together in this piece. So it's just to give you an impression of the size and the aesthetics of it. And they had put in a lot of energy in making the project. And just to give you another impression is that this is the latest piece called Things Matter, where we've asked the community to look at art in the public spaces, you know, this is a big discussion. I think this also goes back to you, Shay, about power relations. What objects do we have in our public spaces? And this also relates to your work with public art, actually. So we asked people to look at public art and reflect on whether it resonated with them. And then we asked them to knit this chosen piece 1 to 10 in a blue color, and then make adjustments in a purple color. So, for example, we have these very famous, huge statues at the West Coast. They're like enormous. They're called People at the Sea, but it's actually 4 men. So some women, some of our participants have chosen that and have put on bikinis and tried to make them female, saying that it's not people, it is men. Commenting on the lack of women in the public spaces. And this is like all over the country. We have had 278 people doing research and making comments on sculpture in the public. And these people, when we have had a large-scale research project on this together with Aarhus University, and where we have followed these people. There's a big Facebook where they interact and discuss their projects. So this community gets together at Facebook and comment on each other, give each other's ideas, and also reflections on what they see and what they feel, and also the problems they have about knitting. So this big community has been looked into, and people, they will say, I can never see a sculpture without thinking of how to knit it next time, or I've noticed all sorts of things around me. So it's just to give you so this is a way of putting a public discourse into the minds of people, or inviting them to put it into their own mind, and through the process of creating this huge collaborative art piece.
Thanks, Karen. It's a really good example. I think Johanna has a question for you both.
Just a really quick question before we break in a few minutes, because another thread that I was starting to see that might be a commonality between what you're both talking about has to do with what I've heard, Shay, you talk about in the past, about the sort of extended call and response relationship, which happens when there's a performance and an audience, or a giver and a receiver, but that the call and response loop, which makes participatory sense making possible, isn't always immediate or isn't always closed in the way that we think of it. And I think about this, going to museum, like you were describing, Karen, having the experience of it and then going home, and maybe that response being something which is stretched out over time, not necessarily looped in directly to being in the museum with these other people, but it sort of spreads out, in time and space. So I wonder if both of you could maybe take up this notion of call and response in that light and talk a little bit about how you see that as being a form of meaning making.
I guess I'll start. So I think that it's interesting because Karen and I have a little bit of a contradictory position on the art process, just because I'm always thinking in terms of linguistic bodies is in interaction. So it's clear that when a curator works with artists, that they are in a proper participatory sense-making relationship, and that the art that comes out of it is the sense that was made, right, between them. My concern with static art, and especially art in museums, because when I think about art, I'm thinking about it democratically. And museums, I feel, are very they've turned out to be very elitist. And so very few people even feel welcome at a museum. And so when they see big pieces of, sculptures and stuff, they don't recognize themselves as the audience for it. And so the people who do engage with these are very self-selected. And once the art piece is out, it strikes me as a unilateral process of sense making, because what it is, and this is brought to me just in terms of like the way that I've talked to the artists about how to engage other kinds of bodies that are different than their own, is that the artist that I've spoken to regards their art as a presentation to others of what is sensical to them, instead of building art for or with others in mind as their target of engagement. And so this is one of the things that they're having trouble with for the experiments, is that I'm telling them that they must choreograph in a way that is intended to be in dialogue with the people who are in the space. And they want to make the art that they want to make. And then if other people like it, then other people like it. And if other people don't, then other people don't. So there's an interesting sense in which we can think of art as sense making, but is not a kind of participatory sense making between the art piece and the audience. And I do think that it can be participatory when we're thinking, like John mentioned, like when we think about it going over time and space. But there is the question about what the artist's intentional message is. And if it's just to tell the person, this is the sense that I want you to take up, then that cuts off the participatory aspect of collaborative meaning making. So these are the issues that I'm trying to get the artists to think about and to resist, and to always have the audience in mind as them understanding where the audience may be and then meeting them there as a way to engage in joint sense making. And I think that can be complicated with static art, just because participatory sense making is between linguistic bodies. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm working with performance artists, because I think that moving bodies can engage different kinds of persons in a way that static art will not, because it will call attention from people, even people who think that art is not for them. And I have done some surveys about art in public in our special parks that have the pieces. And most of the people I ask, like, do you think this art is for you and to you? And almost everybody says no. Right. And they don't think that the art was made for them or with their interests in mind. So they regard the art as being very, very specifically unengaged with them. So that was an interesting sort of thing. So I'm interested in Karen and how she thinks about this, because I think that she can give me more information about how to make my understanding of static art more nuanced, about how it can engage with linguistic bodies. So I'm excited to hear what she says, because it's clear that I'm probably missing something. And I think that she might have something important to give me so that I can think about it in a richer way.
Thank you for that trust. I think so. I always look at there are different kinds of arts. So when we're talking about performed art. It's very different to created art. It's different. The musician is an artist, and the composer is an artist as well. So with the static art is the composed, you can say, and you are talking about the performed art. So obviously there is a difference between those art forms. When we do the collaborative art pieces, there is a very, very strong collaboration between curator and the artist, because the artists are not used to working this way. In this way, I'm working like you. And my key question is always, what are you curious on from the participants? They always start with two things. I don't want all those old people. Could we have some young people in? And they always say, I don't want, can we make them do their thing, and then I'll do my big thing over here? Or they can do what I want. So it's a big, very big emotional and process for the artists to find out through the curatorial process that the people they're going to, that the big, wonderful car or engine that they're looking at, which is all these people they can work with from Traveled, because we have this huge community, that if you put water on it, it will not drive. And the gasoline on it is actually the skill from the person, that you want something from that person, that you acknowledge that they carry something valuable, and that you can actually, that magic will happen when these meet each other. And so it's always a big process to work with the artists and make them curious. At some point that will happen. Some point doesn't happen, then we don't make the project together. So this is a bit like your work with your performing artists, the curiosities on the other. And that is a key in our projects. If we cannot get there, it will not happen. Sometimes they do it kind of halfway, but I can see that the project, when they then receive the contributions from the participants, they are overwhelmed. They never thought that patchwork could have so many expressions, that they never thought that there could be so big richness. And then they are humble. The artist becomes humble, and put together the art piece, and it becomes a beautiful art piece. So you said something about the arts being static, and that is why I always start by saying there's the arts, and then there's the art museum. The art museum is a cultural institution. We have a democratic obligation, but the arts are so many different things. It can be painting, sculpture, it can be many things. And I don't want to change their work. They can do whatever they want. But it's my job as a curator and a museum director to create a space where those who want the traditional way and look at art and understand it, they can do that, but they can do many, many, many other things. And that is the job of the art institution. And that is why I call it an arena for being and becoming. And so when we make an ordinary exhibition, for example, we're curating an exhibition right now called Feel Me. And when we went through all the art pieces on this Friday, the key question was, where is the person going to put her body? Because the ideas about the institution is so firm that some people, they come in and they want to analyze everything and understand everything, and so that they don't sense anything. They are only in that mode. And others, they don't know what to do with themselves, so they just pass things. So if we then work with where to put the body, then we will put them all in a situation where we have changed their normal concept of how to approach the art piece, and they can maybe take it in. So we went through all art pieces and discussed, should we lie here? Should we go through here? Where are they going to place their body? How are the bodies going to interact with each other's and with the art piece? So this is the way kind of the normal institution, when we curate that way, we try to acknowledge and also to create an arena for being and becoming in a more open way, to take away the over determination or the over engagement or the under engagement. I don't know whether that was a reply to you, Shay, but
Yeah, I really like this last bit that you're talking about. Because in my experience, museums claim to be cultural institutions that have the sort of democratic goal. But I've seen the museums who do this, they have these sort of like community nights that have these events that are supposed to bring in people from the outside who usually wouldn't be in. But even to get in the door, it's $100 because it's like $40 to get in, and then it's $30 to park. And then, even to get a drink, it's $20 for a drink. You know what I mean? So it's like, who are you bringing into this space, right? Obviously not members of an excluded community, right? This is very undemocratic. But I like the last bit that you're talking about in terms of bringing bodies together in atypical ways so that they are pushed into a situation to engage with the art and to make the artist not overdetermine the receiver, which is kind of like where my concern lies with museums, is that if the artist is giving their sense, they're overdetermining the relationship. And so I like the way that you're thinking about trying to reconceptualize how the art is being positioned, and that the body is being positioned around the art is intentionally structured in a way to eliminate that concern, right? And to create a little more friction in a positive way, so that the artist, because I think when artists see that people respond to their pieces in different ways, if you can get them to care about that, then it seems like their intentions later on will be to be more concerned with the desires and intentions of the receivers. And so I think I really like the last bit of what you said.
Maybe I should just comment on that. It was not with the artist we went through it. It was with my curator, because this is an exhibition with 24 different artists. So to my knowledge, usually artists actually deliver an art piece, they finish it, and they usually they don't care how people receive it. That's why they don't want tombstones and anything written about it. They say, oh, people should just experience it. So that is the usual approach by artists in my world, at least.
Yeah.
And also, when we're looking at art in general, there are different schools. There's painting, but there's also a big thing which we saw Documenta this last year, which was about collaborative processes and political acts. So that is, and also rejecting the object. That is also a part of the art discourse these days. And we are heavily inspired by that discourse when we do our collaborative art pieces. But we also know that from our participants, it's really important that it becomes an art piece which has a value for other people than themselves. So it's not, and I saw that on the comments before. Somebody wrote, this reminds me of educational projects or something. No, this is not an educational project. These are art projects, and the participants are not artists. They are contributors. The artist is the artist who makes the frame, and who has become curious, was not initially, but became curious on what people could contribute with. And it then becomes, at the end, an art piece which other people can then also be inspired by and go home and maybe also try some things themselves, and maybe also become contributors. And about, I totally agree with you that there is a problem about commercialization of art galleries, that we have to pay that much to get in. It's a huge problem. And when we look into our collaborative art pieces, we've just had a project with 800 contributors, and we asked them, would you consider become a member of the museum club? And they were like, no, they were not. But why not? Because they have become family. They are above that. They are part of the museum now, and they go and they come at the museum and they participate in these projects. They are family. They are not visitors anymore. And for me, that is a very big thing. And then the last thing I wanted to comment on is on this thing, wanting to have new people in. So when we work with these projects, I really reject the idea of saying some people are different. We're going to work with this group. They are this and that different from us. In this way, we have said that we are us and they are them. So when we work with our projects, we're working with an identity about people who are doing something and not people who are demographically something. So in our projects, we have rich and poor, young and old, ugly, and actually in one of the projects, we had 32 social clubs in all over Denmark, and these social clubs are full of alcoholics and schizophrenias, and we invited in and gave it special facilitation in order for them to come into the projects. And some of these people have then continued to be part of our projects, have come out of being the other and just be doers in our projects. So now when we just had delivery, we had this big group of alcoholics who stood there, and they had also contributed, but they were not different. They were a part of everybody else because they were contributors to the project. So this is a part of what, going back to the social engagement, why we have cultural institutions, to include other people, to become a part of a whole body. These people came out of being excluded in these social clubs and are now a part of the community in our around Trapholt, because they have an identity of doing something and not being.
Very cool. I like that.
Yeah, it is great. So thanks, Karen Shay, for this fascinating discussion. And I would like just to invite people to a short break, 5 minutes break, and then we can continuing this discussion with the participants. So I saw already Carson had a question, and there are other questions already in the chat. So I would suggest 5 minutes break, and then we come back to share the discussion with the participants. Okay.
So we'll come back at 27 past the hour.
Thanks, Johanna. So hello, everyone, again. We can slowly start the second part. So I would like to invite the participants to ask questions. I saw before the break, Carson had a question, had raised her hand. I don't know if she's still there, but yeah, just wanted to invite the participants to ask the questions and joining to this fascinating discussion. So Haf?
Yes, okay. Oh, sorry. I only want to, because I was the one that said it, I thought it sounded like an educational project. And I wanted to explain what I mean by educational. I don't mean schools or anything like that. I mean educational in the sense of human formation, human development. So in the sense that I use the word education, education is a constant dimension of our entire lives all the time. And so is teaching and learning. So I meant in that sense that the participants in the project are involved in a transformative process, which I would call educational. And so are the artists as well. You know? And my specific question is whether you noticed any difference between male and female artists in their reaction to the participants, picking up on what Shay was saying about male domination, whether the female artists were more receptive to what the other participants were doing. than the male artists, or if you didn't notice any difference at all?
It would be unfair to judge all male artists on our work because we've only worked with one male artist.
Ah,
And we have the museum has also, it's not only the participants and the artists, the museum has changed as well. And we have learned a lot through our processes. And in the beginning, we were mainly concerned about stretching their creativity, and the idea about having more specific questions about, society questions have come into our ambitions. So the museum has changed a lot. So the male artist we worked with was one of our earlier pieces, and his response to the contributions was just as overwhelmed as the others. I remember him saying, I could only have wood turned 20 different forms, and here I have 1,300 forms. I could never have done this. Like when we did a piece about the climate crisis, where people were we asked them to make a patchwork of a tree that they loved. We didn't want to go into the climate crisis with fear. We wanted to go into a biodiversity love. So we asked people to find a tree they loved and make a patchwork in a specific color scheme. And then she was also like so overwhelmed that she photographed them all and made a new library of patchwork because she never thought that you could make that many different patchworks. So it's the same response. So I think when I look at differences between the artists we worked with, well, some artists have been more receptive to the possibility than others. So we've had a female artist who did not even read the testimonials by the contributors. They all make a testimonial about their thoughts and only saw it as form. And so that was a female artist. So I couldn't say there is a difference, but I've only got one male artist to compare it with. I think I think people are different. And yeah, but you could say we've only worked with one male artist. In that way, you could say there is. And I just have one more comment. That's about when you learn, because you're mentioning this educational, and I totally agree with Shay that learning and experience doesn't happen instantly. It happens a month later, a year later, and we bring it with us in our bodies, our experiences. All of a sudden, oh yeah, that was what happened. Like when AI came and they had half a year after they had done data mirror, they were like, that was what happened. So learning is definitely something that occurs all our lives.
Yeah, I would say in my experience of being amongst male and female artists, performing artists, I would say that there's definitely a difference. I mean, people who are engaged in performing arts have a certain kind of narcissism about their bodies. It's necessary, right, to construct the body and to show the body and do these kinds of things. And I don't mean like an insidious kind of narcissism. I just mean there's got to be some kind of overconfidence, right, in the body's ability to be under scrutiny, I guess you could say. But the men seem to have absolutely no self-consciousness. Like they're just so the question about whether or not they're coming off the way that they should, and that the audience is going to take exactly what they need to be taking, and that there's no error in communication, is sort of the attitude of the male performers that I've interacted with. And then the women that I've worked with, because of even though they have a kind of body narcissism that's necessary to be a body performer, their self-consciousness about their bodies, because of the denigration of bodies for women and the constant policing of women's bodies, they have a very deep self-consciousness about performing and their ability to succeed, not in the movements, but like in the movement. Like they're always like, I don't know if I can make this look good, and I don't know if my body looks good doing this thing that I need to do. And so there's this constant berating of their bodies and discounting of the success of their body's ability when they're performing. And even for the best women performers that I know, who are, you know, super like Cirque du Soleil, the performers, right? There is still a constant policing of their own bodies, and like they'll take images or like pieces of video and show it to other people and be like, is my body doing this right? And like, I don't know if it's going to be received by the audience because of the failure of my body in this certain kind of way. So it is very interesting for me to see performing artists have this very different attitude to what's going to happen when they take their bodies out into the public for uptake.
So the asymmetry that works normally everywhere and in public also carries over into their performance.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like there's no time in which women aren't 100% aware of their bodies and how their bodies look. And so that's constantly getting in the way of women being assured of their credibility, whether with their body communication or with their verbal communication. So it carries right on over, at least in my experience.
Different cultures perceive it.
Okay, thanks, Haf, for the question. Are there other questions?
Yes.
Do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Thank you both. It's very inspiring. Actually, I was wondering about the notion when you talk about the need for an absence of domination. I can see how that happens, the way you set up what you do. And did you work on how to get back into the usual everyday life where we are always in settings of domination? Do you have a clue on how to evaluate or how to carry over that experience that happens thanks to this setting framing you can control in either institution?
Are you asking how do we prevent that? Like, or are you asking?
No, I'm asking how can we carry over that type of participatory sense making and collaboration, which is becoming meaningful to all parties involved, which can happen or which is facilitated in a setting where somebody takes care that there is less presence of domination. So we know that when there is this setting, collaboration is facilitated and engagement is facilitated. And if we manage to somehow orchestrate that, do you have an idea how we can carry that over, that everybody can build up on that experience, even when back into usual societal patterns
That
And
is a
how to
brilliant. It's a very, very good question, Petra. And hi, Petra.
Hello, I'm so happy to see you.
It's a really, really good question. And so when we think about that, we are, I call it ninjas, my craft ninjas. Does it change anything? When I hear them talk about how, well, we do evaluate in the way that we ask them in all kinds of things. You cannot ask people, if you want a result, you cannot ask that specific thing. So we ask around. And one of the things we ask people about is whether they talk to others about who did not participate about the project. And we see this, and there we see that they talk to more people who are outside the project than people inside the project about the projects. So we see that we interpret that as a sign of that they bring the agency with them into their normal lives. But I think it could be a really, really interesting research project to look into exactly that. So thank you for the idea. Because we have done so much research on these projects. I could have spent hours telling you about all the research we do, but this we have not explored yet. And that is, of course, my big passion, actually. It is the impact and how it changes our ideas about what art is, how it changes our idea what a museum can be, what it means to be a participant. I want it all to change the roles in these, but we have not looked into that yet. I think it's a really good question.
I would say that that's actually my project and the purpose of what I'm doing. And so this is, again, because I'm so interested in specifically the linguistic bodies framework. And I think that oppression is based on body-body bias, right? And that oppression is a result of how one body feels about another body and the sense that they are forcing onto that body because that's a subjugated body. And so the goal of my residency project is to have different kinds of bodies doing different kinds of movement in public spaces that will attract the attention of different others that can affect the sense that the observer is forcing onto the performing body that is different than their own. So when they look at this body doing these kinds of movements that they wouldn't expect a body like that to be doing, then one of the more fundamental senses that their body receives is that this body doesn't mean everything that I'm saying that it means. And so it's disrupting this assumption of what subjugated bodies are supposed to mean. And if we think about having these kinds of performing bodies in public spaces on a regular basis in a way that people in the broader community will run up against and will constantly see different kinds of bodies doing different kinds of things that they didn't think that bodies like that should be doing, then there is a constant attempt to reshape the sense making between bodies that over time and over exposure, people who have a biased assumption about what that kind of body means will have their subconscious embodied biases adjusted. And so that is something that can happen over time. So it's not something that's very explicit that can happen, and it's not something that will happen quickly, right? So if you see an elder, like I said, I have the 90-year-old man doing this acrobatic stuff that's going to be choreographed and as a communicative piece, right? They don't think that 90-year-old bodies do that. And they don't think that 90-year-old bodies mean that. And so being exposed to a 90-year-old body who's doing these kinds of things and communicating these kinds of meanings will be taken up by the observer's body, and then will subtly start to carve out and carve away against the biases they have against elderly bodies. And so I think that, and so this is what I'm interested in, is how to use public arts, and I'm doing the linguistic body thing. So how to use creatively performing bodies to creatively move in a way to subtly change over time what bodies mean in society, so that there is more of an ability in other spaces to have authentic participatory sense making. And so that's what I'm trying to capture with these experiments. And that's what I think is possible. But again, I can argue that philosophically all day long, and everybody's going to say, oh, neat argument. Right? Nice way to think that an artist can overcome oppression, right? And so that's why I'm trying to figure out, like, what are these perceptual reactions and how does it happen over time? Because I'm doing it over a series of months. And so, yeah, so that is what I'm interested in.
So thanks Petra for the great question, and Karen and Shay for the comments. So Marcia.
Yes, hello. Well, I have a question. I don't know if it's exactly a question, but it has a lot to do with these things that we were discussing, that Shay was just saying, because I felt that the way that you spoke about participatory sense making in terms of an idealistic way of creating meaning, and the way you're talking about this, the relation of the domination relationship. I think I felt that it was quite deterministic in some way, but I like the idea that you're thinking of ways of reshaping this relationship. And what I thought, or my question would be, if you think that there are different ways of engaging in a participatory sense-making relationship, that even in a different domination relationship, for example, let's not say men and women, let's put the example of children and adults. Do you think that, for example, there are different ways of engaging in this relationship, being aware of the domination and asymmetric processes that are behind those relationships, but in the way of participating together, or the activities mediating participatory sense making, that there is a way of reshaping those relationships, and reshaping in that way the domination process itself, for example, or and if you think that there is a way, maybe it's a hard question, how to grasp those subtle ways or degrees of domination, and how to try to measure that in a relation, in the participatory sense making relationship. I don't know, those are just big questions, but maybe you have some ideas about it.
Karen, did you want to say anything about this?
I can comment on one thing, that is that the domination in the art museum, as I see it, I'm not talking about our collaborative art pieces, but about people going to an art museum. And I also think that was what you were describing earlier, Shay, is that people carry inside themselves a hierarchy, thinking that the art museum is a dominating place with a dominating discourse. And it's really a hard work getting that away. to make people put that aside and then focus on experiencing and reflecting and experimenting, perhaps even. And we run a big project for people with stress, angst, and anxiety, and people with psychological problems. And in this project, we, of course, will work with, put aside the art historical discourse, and then we teach people to experience and reflect. And we also do this with young people. And these projects are so good and they are so effective. It changes people's lives. And we teach them to practice it at home, to use what they have at home, and to start sensing their surroundings, and also to go into the nature, go to other galleries. And but we cannot do that with the general audience because it would be too intimidating to tell people to relax, do something else. You can only do it if people want if we have we have agreed on this is what we're going to do, because the discourse of domination is so big, it is so strong, it is crazy, and it is actually ruining museums. Also, we have the discourse of money and galleries and how much is it worth. So there are two really, really bad and hard dominating discourses on the arts and on the museum institution. So it's not about male or female. This is about institutional power. And I always say, when we have hierarchies, actually very often they are built from underneath. So I'm also the director of a museum. I know many directors who want a flat organization and want to be social, but actually sometimes hierarchies comes from down. From people want the hierarchy because then they have maybe less responsibility or something. So how hierarchies are created and domination works, it can be built from many different places. And I also meet many men who would like to be considered less dominant, but they are made dominant. So reaction and response, what is that? Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if I want to address the children part or the non-children part. Do you have a preference?
I work with children, so that's why I brought the example, but
Right.
you can take it.
Yeah. So because children are still developing, I mean, there's always the inherent power relationship of a parent-child. Like it just has to be that way in a certain sense, but there's the responsibility of the parent to start to cultivate and encourage the child to develop autonomy, right? And to start being a contributor in the participatory sense-making project. And so I think that from early stages, children are learning what sense-making looks like and are, right, mimicking, right, the sense that is shared with them as they're supposed to do, right, in the learning developmental process. And then as they get older, they see the dynamics of how to do participatory sense making. That's actually one of the ways that, like, children learn how to have embodied relations of domination to others, right? Like, children learn to be afraid of other kinds of people through participatory sense making with their parents by seeing what their parents do and mimicking it, right? But there's this interesting part where children become a certain kind of age where they're starting to kind of exercise their testimonial autonomy. And we can see in cases that the power relation can become a domination relation by silencing the child's testimony. And we see this a lot in molestation, in sexual abuse instances, where children are trying to give their testimony in a participatory way to say what happened to them and what happened to them and what happened to their bodies. And then you'll have parents and adults thinking something like, they don't quite understand what this participation meant, or their bodies didn't quite understand what the interaction meant, right? So we always encourage children to learn testimonial autonomy, but when children bring up oppressive abuse, that's when you can see the power relationship of development turn into a domination relationship. And so, that's why there are all these movements for, protecting young girls and trying to highlight, because even like if we think about sexual abuse cases that go public for children, like in the court or other kinds of things, the assumption that little girls' bodies are inviting and are seductive, right, through their youthfulness, right? There is this oppressive bias about little girl bodies being irresistible, which takes away some of the blame or responsibility of the abuser, and that leaves the children just crushed. You know what I mean? Where the autonomy and testimony that they were learning to do was ripped away from them. And then they lose that ability, especially little girls. And that's one of the things that will carry with girls, is having their testimony discredited, especially testimony about their bodies. They carry that forever, right? And so that is one of the things that can disrupt a participatory interaction in sense making, even if nobody is aware of that. So, so I think it is a good thing, and to have that power relationship between a parent and a child. But we can see that when certain children are giving testimony against the dominant understandings about adult children interactions, that they will be silenced. And so that's the way we can think about domination for children in their attempt to learn how to participate in sense making.
Thanks, Marcia. Do you want to add something? Or
I was just thinking ways of healing that silence, or that silenced children, if there are any, but it just came to my mind as a thought.
thanks. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm a bit sad because we are approaching the end of the session, and I have the impression that we are in the middle of a very rich discussion. So I'm having this feeling that we are interrupting something that is still very alive. And I don't know if we still have time to one more question maybe, or but I wanted to thank for this rich discussion, and to say that I hope we can still keep this discussion alive on Slack. But anyway, maybe we are still have time for a quick question.
Maybe if we have 5 more minutes. I know, Amy, you had a great question that might
Yes.
open the discussion out, if you wanted to finish us off.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a good idea to open it out at this time of day, but I was thinking about the notion of curating as being rooted in the idea of care. And I think that that's something that you've brought up over and over again, and particularly in this last part of the discussion. And I was also thinking about a concept of participatory sense making that Hannah de Jager particularly loves, which is the idea of letting be, which is this notion, as you know, Shay and perhaps Karen, which is that you have to take care not to overdetermine or underdetermine the other in a participatory situation, I guess one might say. So I was just wondering if both of you did in a way evoke this idea of, in your own practices, of trying to think about this idea of a suspension. That is this suspended moment of kind of respectfulness that's so central to care. And I just was wondering if either of you would like to comment on that, because we're very interested in these issues of power and care at Mind and Life Europe.
Karen?
Yeah, I can try. Well, care is essential. It is about, but I'm not sure whether I give you the right reply. But it's about you cannot do these projects if you don't if there isn't care. So in a way, you could say it's caring for the participants, for the artist, for the materials, for the space, and also for the audience, and also the institution. And letting be, I'm not an expert on Hannah de Jaeger's letting be, but as I understood it was not to be over or underdetermined, and to get that point where everybody feels free to participate with what they have on all levels. And that is maybe the right there where it works very well in our projects, when the artist is careful enough to make the rules but doesn't decide, and where the participants they want to contribute, but they also understand that they cannot just dominate it with their contribution, because then it would not become a whole. And when we evaluate, we do a lot of research on these projects. We actually ask people, what did you think about the rules before the project, and what did you think about the rules after the project? And many, they say, oh yes, I was a bit very critical about the rules, but they were great. You must never leave the rules. That is why that was the transformative part of this project for me. And the same with the artists. Some artists, they just want to do everything themselves, but others, they're like, they don't care about the participants. They're like, yeah, they can do whatever. But then they're not really interested in what the participants could do under a few restrictions. So with these artists, it's a big job to create the right rules, or the set of, what do you call it, set of principles. It's better to say than rules, sounds like power, but it's more sets of principles. So getting into this caring point is I think that's a very I will bring that with me. I've learned a lot from this session, actually. That is that can kind of frame what we are doing. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, so there's an interesting sense in which I would say that to care for, when we're thinking about domination relationships in participatory sense making, one of the ways to resist domination as a dominant group member is to learn about the ways that their bodies dominate the person with whom they're interacting, and to know what it does to meaning making. And in that sense, if they want to do their part in fighting oppression in sense making, they need to take care of, right, the other in a way that means that they let themselves be, right? So a way to take care of the other in a just way is to make sure the person who typically dominates lets themselves be. And because that allows their body to indirectly care for the body of the subjugated person, to give the body more space, to give the body more feelings of safety, and to give the body more confidence in being at that moment the contributor, since the participation goes back and forth, right? And so the dominant group member has to let themselves be, and you have to be very vigilant about it, right? You have to be very aware of your body movements and your body position, and you have to be aware of the tone of your voice, and you have to be aware of the specific kinds of senses that you're communicating, because so much of it is trained embodied domination. And so when I think about care in the relationships, it is important to think about there's a dominating way to take care of, right? Where they're like, I'll take care of you and help you make sense. And that's very oppressive, right? And so if you want to have sense making in a just way, you need to have care. And that responsibility to care falls on the dominant group member, but that care requires to make them let themselves be, so that they don't overdetermine the relationship and just take away their interactors' ability to participate. So we are not taught to care in relationships and in sense making, because Western frameworks are built on domination relations. So the idea is always to try to come out a winner in a sense making interaction, right? And the thought of care is very feminist and very embodied, and it's not something that's very valued, but justice requires this, especially justice with bodies. And so the care has to be exercised by the dominant group member, but directed towards themselves, to take care of how they act and to take care of how they perform. And I think that is a way of resisting dominating relations and sense making. I don't know if that's what you were looking for.
No, very much so. Thank you very much, both of you, for that. And it's for me, in my practice, it goes back to what Ezekiel de Paulo talks about in terms of participatory sense making as being a listening, immersive epistemology, rather than an objectivist or a feeling epistemology. So, but it's very interesting the twist you add, which is being careful. Thank you very much, both of you, Karen and Shay.
Thanks, Amy, for this brilliant question. I think it's a very good point to end our session today. I would like to thank again Shay and Karen for being here and to this very, very rich discussion. And I hope we'll keep going on Slack. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shay. Thank you, Karen. And thank you, Letitia, for your beautiful hosting this evening. And I think we just had an end slide just to let folks know of our upcoming programming. So we'll meet back here actually very soon. So we don't have a 3-week break this time. We'll be back next week on the 5th of June for our next set of verbs. We'll be exploring teaching, learning, and transmitting. So we look forward to seeing you again in just a week. And we have a new podcast episode dropping on the 6th of June next week with Michel Bitbol, who many of you may know, great philosopher, physicist, and a wonderfully eclectic mind in our community. And finally, we'll have an Emily Friends talk on the 27th of June, taking up Enaction and pedagogy. So thank you, everyone, for joining tonight, both in the live Zoom room and on YouTube. And we'll see you back in just a week. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Shay. Thanks a lot. And thank you, Karen.
Thank you.